Let's get started. Janus, tell us about your longtime relationship with Steven Spielberg and what makes that work.
I have worked with Steven since 1993, so that's a very good relationship that evolves constantly. Every picture we do, we discover new things about each other, not just in terms of personalities, but also the creative energy that we built around the project. After making so many movies with him and being with him for such a long time, I personally still discover that he's got so much new, untapped creativity that every movie that we do, he amazes me with his new point of view, with the ability to tell the story a different way. So it never became routine. And that's what's very exciting to me.
So, for example, this film, The Post, what did the two of you begin to talk about when he brought it to you?
Steven said, I've got this really great story. It's a story about the Pentagon Papers and Washington Post publishing the papers against the government's advice and demand of not publishing the papers. It's going to be with Tom Hanks and Meryl Streep, and we're going to start in 2 months. And of course, I was very excited about it. I knew it's going to be a period movie. I knew I have to figure out what is the language, what is the approach, what is the light, where are the lights coming from, what is the framing, and so forth. All that stuff that we all have to figure out before we make the movie.
If we don't hold them accountable, who will?
We can't hold them accountable if we don't have a newspaper.
Nixon will muster the full power of the presidency, and if there's a way to destroy you, by God, he'll find it.
I'm asking your advice, Bob, not your permission.
You can't do this.
The legacy of the company is at stake.
What will happen if we don't publish? We will lose. The country will lose.
How did working with him on this one compare to your early movie, like, for example, when he came to you for Schindler's List?
Usually when you look at Steven's movies, he will have two characters who are the principal characters. So if you think of Lincoln, which was a big canvas picture with very important words coming out of actors, on this movie, you've got more than just Lincoln. You've got 5, 6 characters who are not just doing one main role. They are equally important to each other. So it was, in that aspect, the movie was very different. I think Steven was much more focused on, not necessarily on the imagery, but on the content. And he's always focused on the content. But somehow, as we all know, he's such a director that his movies are told through language of camera and camera movements and lighting and all that stuff.
Sure.
But here he was very much focused on the content and actors' performance more than, not more, it's just different than he was with Lincoln, because he's got many actors of equal importance.
Sure. Bob, you've worked with George Clooney before. Tell us a little bit about what makes that relationship work.
I'd seen his first movie, or actually, he'd made 2 movies, I think, before I worked with him. And his approach is really an actor's approach, I think, to directing. And it's one of the things that I think until you've experienced it, it is very different from someone who is a writer-director primarily, or always a director. He really looks at the actors and what's going on with the actors. They're his closest collaborators. And this picture that I just did with him was very different because he didn't act in it at all. He wasn't in it. He really just directed it. And he and Grant, Heslov, his partner, rewrote a Coen Brothers script, which I'm sure Roger would have shot, actually, had it actually gone about, was it like 15 years ago, I think, was when they wrote it, Suburbicon. And Grant and George added a whole level to the script that wasn't there originally. It's about a small community on the East Coast. These were houses that were built right after World War II for very little money that were, it was sort of middle-class housing, and they were housing developments, the first ones in the United States. And this one particular one had a black family move in. It actually really happened, and there was a race riot, and a number of other things took place that we don't really associate or think about with the North in the United States. So they wanted to include that in this Coen Brothers murder script. So they made a kind of a little bit of a mashup with it.
Out for a ride?
Surprise for you when you get home.
What did you do?
You're gonna pay us that money.
What did you do?
You're gonna pay us that money.
What did you do?
You're gonna pay us that money!
He actually hired the same storyboard artist who does all the Coen Brothers movies. So he storyboarded the whole film, and it actually helped a lot. It's the first time I've worked with him where that happened, where we actually went through it, and it made it, I know we all have different ideas about how to work with storyboards, but it actually made a big difference on it. And he actually does focus on the visuals in a very specific way. He had a very clear idea about what he wanted the movie to look like, which wasn't my experience with him before quite so much. So that was kind of different.
Roger, you've worked with Denis Villeneuve before, but what did you think when he first said to you, we're going to make Blade Runner?
Well, I think he was terrified, and I think that kind of like made me feel even more terrified. I mean, it was one of those sort of things, though, you can't say no to sort of the opportunity. You know what I mean? And having worked with Denis twice, you know, and had a really good relationship with him, and we have a very similar sort of sensibility, and we kind of like to work in a similar way. We consider, you know, the script and how each scene's going to be translated quite a lot. You know, we spend a lot of time in prep just talking things through. He likes to shoot with a single camera, you know, stuff like that. So we say we have a similar way of working. So it was Blade Runner was something I couldn't say no to. Why would I?
When did the two of you start talking about it, and what was kind of the process before you began?
We started. I went to Montreal. He was cutting Arrival, and I was staying in Montreal for a few months at the end of 2015. So it was like 9 months before we started shooting. We started storyboarding it. But, we started really talking about the script and how to visualize it. And actually, some of the script in terms of the staging and the setting sort of changed as we discussed it. And it was also, Dennis Gasson was also there. So we were discussing the overall look at the film as we went through the script. And so I really like that process. I think, especially on a film like that, the prep is so important. And then gradually we started storyboarding, getting more and more specific about different scenes.
So you're working closely with the production designer at that stage
as well?
all
the way. Yeah. All the way, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
The ancient models give the entire endeavor a bad name. What a gift, don't you think? From Mr. Wallace to the world. The outer colonies would never have flourished had he not bought Tyrell, revivified the technology. To say the least of what we do.
Hoyte, you've done a few films with Christopher Nolan already. Tell us about your collaborative process.
You know, after you finish a film, it's always kind of unsatisfying because you started to discover things together, and one film is just not enough to develop that on, and then you do a next film and you get much deeper into the matter and you can challenge each other much more. It's so much about chemistry as well, you know. In the beginning you're very stiff and you're really feeling each other out and you're sort of tiptoeing around each other, but then on the next project you can do more, you dare to do more, and you can use things that you have been learning from each other, and I very much enjoy that. I very much enjoy sort of the next picture in that perspective. You know, I took over from Wally, of course, which is always this very scary thing. You know, it's like after a divorce, you know, you're the new girlfriend. You know, it's like,
I've been there a couple of times. It's fun though,
and it's fun. You know?
Wally Pfister wanted to pursue directing at that point.
Wally wanted to pursue directing, so Chris had to find a new person, and he found me. But you know, you're scared to death in the beginning. You want to fulfill certain expectations. You want to deliver what had been delivered before, and at the same time, you want to bring something of yourself to the table. You know.
I'm on him, bail out. The swell looks good, I'm ditching.
Now, it sounds like the two of you also had a lot of fun together on this, because you told me the two of you got to go up in the Spitfires. And
yeah, we had a tremendous amount of fun, yes. Like two little boys, you know, flying in a Spitfire is very much fun, but we just wanted to figure out how it really felt, you know. We wanted to know what the G-forces do to your body and how the light changes, and we just wanted to understand what it is to sit in a small sort of, you know, plexiglass encased cabin, you know, and feel that claustrophobia, at the same time feel the sort of the magnitude and the space around. We wanted to see with our own eyes how planes can move, you know, the physics behind it, how they move in relationship to each other. Very important, you know, for one plane to line up on another plane and start shooting at it. There's a lot of physics. We were very much interested in showing the difficulty of that very thing, you know, not only sort of the beauty and the graciousness of it, but also very much the difficulty. So we went out flying just to to be able to understand.
So Dan, you've worked with Guillermo del Toro before, but tell us a little bit about how you work together specifically on The Shape of Water.
When we shot the Crimson Peak for some years ago, that was a very colorful movie. And he talked about this love story between this girl that's not talking and a fish. And I was like, what is this about? You know, so weird, you know, how can that be interesting? And he talked very much about it should be a black and white movie. So in the beginning, we talked about a lot of black and white, but I want to shoot it monochromatic, like, you know, like old-fashioned black and white. And of course, nobody wants to pull the money up for that because then there's no way around it, you know. Normally you're shooting color and you're making a black and white in post, and then you have both options. But we didn't want to do that. And of course, that was a long process because we were shooting a very colorful movie. So in the beginning, like going black and white, I was so excited, like, yes, you know, all the cinematographers in the world want to shoot black and white, and I was so keen about, like, this must be fantastic. So for a couple of months, I was so happy. And then we couldn't find the money or whatever it was, you know, so we decided to go color again.
Damn it.
We have to go.
Where are you? Where the fuck are you?
Of course, I'm very pleased about the movie, and, you know, we have worked together since 96, I think it was, and then we took a break for some years, and we met again for Crimson Peak, and it was like we have been together for 2 days before. It was amazing, you know, and he's so much a movie maker, so for him, it's, you know, he's talking about a camera move and lightning, and, you know, we're on the same page there, so it was like coming back home after like 15 years vacation.
Rachel, what was it like working with Dee Rees for the first time when you made Mudbound?
Well, Dee and I had sort of known each other from the indie circuit. I think we've both been sort of mutual fans of each other's work and kind of knew each other a little bit socially. Bradford, who had shot Pariah for her, is one of my good friends. And, you know, for whatever reason, I don't know if he wasn't available or she just thought I was a better fit for this project, but she approached me about it. You know, it's a book originally. And so the script that she sent me was sort of the first pass. But from that very first script, it was, you know, it was really sort of my dream period. She had me at 1940s, and then everything else was kind of, you know, bonus on that. But I was a big fan of Pariah. I was a big fan of her short. You know, she had a short called Pariah that sort of inspired the feature. So just sort of from the first conversation, it felt like this was a good one to do.
What good is a deed? My grandfathers and great uncles, grandmothers and great aunts, father and mother, broke, tilled, tall, planted, plucked, raised, burned, broke again. Worked this land all they lives, this land that never would be theirs.
Now, this was shot in just 29 days on location in Louisiana during the summer. You had heat, you had obviously mud, a lot of challenges. Tell us a little bit about the challenges of shooting this film.
It was brutal. I mean, we had initially set out to shoot it in January, and of course, between financing and casting and all those things, it sort of pushed and pushed and pushed. And next thing you know, we're sort of in the South in July, you know, on a plantation with no respite from the heat. The two interiors had no windows. There was sort of no way to air condition them, even if we hypothetically could. You know, mud was sort of, I mean, you see the title and you know you're in for it a little bit, but mud was, you know, if it wasn't rain that we were creating, it was in the South in the summer, you sort of get 1 to 2 thunderstorms a day. So you're in the middle of a sunny scene and 2 minutes later it's pouring. And then you're sort of cleaning all the gear off and, you know, shuffling through and trying to find some continuity with what you've been doing before. And then we had to make mud when there was no mud. So it was the elements, you know, both man-made and certainly the real elements were really the biggest challenge on that film.
Were there instances where it would start raining and you'd just decide, okay, this scene's gonna be in the rain?
There was actually a lot of scripted rain. If it started raining, we would go and grab the scenes that were intended to be in the rain. The problem is that it rains there for 20 minutes and then it stops raining. So there was a lot of starting something and then having to figure out ways to match to the thing that you had started. And the other thing is just the gear. We would often find we sort of one road in to this plantation, one road out, and we would end up with sort of whether it was pettibones or fly swatters that stuck in the mud, couldn't move. I mean, there was also just the fallout from all of the rain and the water. The logistics were really tough.
Dan, what were some of the challenges you faced during production, as The Shape of Water was shot in 60 days and on a $20 million production budget?
It's a pretty small movie money-wise, but it looks, if you ask me, pretty big. Of course, there was challenge, to find a way to work around, because we couldn't afford a lot of stuff. We have to fight for all the equipment, so we shot with a very small camera package. We shot most of the time with one camera. Pretty small movie comparing to what we was trying to do. And we have to fight for every crane day we have to get in, we have to fight for that because we could not afford it, so we shot a lot of small cheap arm and a hot head because we like to have this moving the camera as much as possible. And Guillermo is never shooting a master, All the shot is shot by shot. So it's, of course, time-consuming to take walls off and on and all the time, and he's trying to shoot as much as possible, chronological, so it's like going on and off, and that's, of course, difficult again with the lighting because you have to go back again later on in the day to the same lighting setup. But the biggest challenge was, we have to be very clever about how we spend our money because 95% of the movie is in the studio. And when we was outside, we was in the rain all the time as well. We was doing artificial rain, night times at big night setups with a lot of rain. And because we were shooting in the winter time, so we have to heat up the rain because it was so cold. So we have problems with the rain deflectors getting foggy and all that stuff everybody knows about. And the actors could not stand it. Poor Sally was standing there with a small jacket on. It was like pouring down with rain for hours and hours. So we was shooting with heated rain. There was a challenge. It was so fun to do it, because to work with Guillermo is like he's so much a movie maker. So it's a pleasant to be a part of that, of course. But we have to be clever. We could not just order stuff in all the time. We have to be very precise what we need that day.
Sure.
So that was pretty good.
It was almost like he was talking about Blade Runner. I mean, we could say it was a different budget, but then, the more money the budget has, then the more expectation and the more you push yourself probably to do stuff and, you get down to the same thing. We had the same issues. We were shooting outside on the back lot for some scenes, and both Denny and I said, we're not shooting outside unless it's grey, overcast and raining. That's it. And of course, production, we're going, oh my God, what are we going to do? And, so it's the same issues. We shot some work on a tank that we actually built to shoot this night exterior with wave machines, this like storm sequence. And of course, the water had to be heated because it was like end of October or November, I think we were shooting it. And it was really cold. It was almost freezing, but it was really kind of nice. You get a happy accident because all the water started steaming about 7 o'clock. You got this fantastic steam. So every evening after I figured that was happening, I had to stall before we started shooting so I could get this steam so everything matched. So it's like, you get the same thing, isn't it? It doesn't, in a way, it doesn't matter what the budget is. Everything's scaled up for what you...
Now, in the film, there are some of the sets where you use water to such great effect with the reflections and to create movement. Can you talk a little bit about how you approached that?
It started all that time ago in Montreal discussing the whole kind of concept. And then so there's this one character that Jared Leto plays. And I just wanted his interiors to kind of always be about moving light, as though he had this sort of sunlit interior in this world that's full of fog and snow outside, but he's created this artificial kind of world. So then I just started, just trolling the web, basically, looking at different architects and the way they use light, and then, discovering things like, you have a water on a ceiling and you put light through it and you get wonderful caustics. And so it was all that. It was kind of progression.
To go back to when you were starting to talk about it in Montreal, obviously this is a sequel to a classic film with a very distinct look. To what extent did the original inform your decisions of what the overall film would look like?
I think, in all honesty, not much. Obviously, it's got parallels because it's the same world 30 years on, but it's very much Denis's own take on the script. It's a film that could stand by itself.
Yeah.
And I'm not Jordan Cronenworth. I could not like Jordan, so I didn't even wanted to go there. I mean, I kind of like in a naturalistic way, in a much simpler way. And he's got his style was so much more classic and cuts and a wonderful. I couldn't do that. So, you know, I didn't even really want to go there, frankly.
I feel terrible because everyone's had a struggle. Everyone's in the mud and it's raining and it's cold and I just had a great time. And it was like 80 degrees, outdoors. We had these wonderful sets that were air conditioned. It was the opposite of a struggle. We had all this money.
But now
we never had nothing ever, no, I'm being serious actually. They were very simple. Both movies were done in LA. I got to go home at night. I didn't have to live in some other country.
That's a good
I was
moral
very
for the
lucky.
story. Shoot more in Los Angeles.
It's true.
Even though they were both shot in Los Angeles, they were very different looks. Downtown Los Angeles, and then you had this
Well, you know, the
suburb.
The sort of film digital discussion is one I sort of don't enjoy having very much, but I think that's really one of the reasons. The Denzel movie, he wanted to shoot on film, so did the director. And George wanted to shoot digitally, and they do have a distinct look, and or at least I can't figure out how to change them. I mean, I end up with something out of the box on film that I don't seem to be able to find, and I actually hope to talk to somebody here to explain how to do it, because my digital work seems to be a little bit homogenized and a little clinical looking, and that tends to be what I sort of fight against a little bit. And when I shoot film, it sort of automatically happens. I don't end up having to kind of make that struggle. It's just sort of immediately. But that's really, I think, the real difference. But they're very different movies. It was a stylized period film in Suburbicon. It was kind of naturalistic lighting. And the Roman Israel, the Denzel movie, was a little more theatrical and a little bit different in terms of lighting. So that is the difference. But I think when I look at them, I have no style. I have no idea what I'm doing usually. And it just sort of grows out of conversations with the director and whoever the production designer is. And I don't know, is anybody else? I still have a real hard time figuring out how to work digitally in a creative way where it doesn't seem, I guess clinical is the word that keeps coming to mind. But I don't know. When you see Suburbicon, you'll have to let me know. I have no idea. But it doesn't feel quite the same to me anymore.
Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
Nobody wants to get into that. Well,
maybe-
you shot IMAX. You shot 65 millimeter, right? For most.
Right, so Dunkirk was IMAX and 65 millimeter.
You know, I'm doing a film in 65 Alexa right now, and it's like 100%. It's worse to me. It sort of has a. Anyway.
Don't use any fill light. I think that's the key for being shooting digital. You know, you have to do it pretty dark.
I have to learn filters again. I just I don't seem to be able
When
to
we shot Crimson Peak, we have a filter behind the lens. You know, we have a diffusion filter. Yeah.
All right.
And we did the same in Shape of Water. We have a black pro mist inside the camera.
Well, you're still shooting film too.
Yes.
Yeah.
But why don't you just try to continue shooting on that where you feel comfortable with?
It's never up to me. It's never, you know that. I mean, it's like, when do you have that discussion? Nobody wins that debate. It depends on the movie. But I was thinking, the original Blade Runner had such an effect on me when I saw it in film school so long ago. And the trailer, the scale of it, I think somehow you figured out how to do this. Something you seem to be able to.
I'd use an iPhone. I wouldn't. I'm fed up with this conversation. I think it's what's in the frame and
it always is, isn't
how
it?
you light it. And you know, I mean, the first film I did digitally was In Time,
right?
And we made the decision to shoot that digitally because of the kind of film it was. We wanted something a bit. Actually, we wanted it a bit synthetic, but we were only going to use it for part of the film.
Right.
And then we just thought, well, it's not. I don't see any difference. And I just thought at that point, you know, the time had come to start shooting digitally.
Yeah,
and
that's how I felt too.
Yeah, I don't really do anything differently.
Oh.
I don't put any filters on.
And how much
I
do
never
you...
have. I don't use fill light anyway, so I haven't changed anything really. You know?
So what do you do anything different in post? Do you find yourself spending?
No, I do it in camera as much as I can.
Gotcha.
Although, you know, they say obviously there's more latitude and stuff, but I like, you know, in Blade Runner, we did all the colours in camera. Everything's actually on the digital negative, you know.
Right.
So, I mean, but it's more fun doing it that way, apart from anything else.
Oh my God, yeah.
Sure. So I just basically haven't changed at all, really.
Good for you.
You know, around town, I've talked to various post houses who said it feels like they're seeing more film this year. And then if you talk to exhibitors, Dunkirk is a great example. The film did very well where it was shown with film projection. What are all of your thoughts on where film is going?
Well, and I'm also kind of fed up with the discussion in many ways, and it's I think that discussion has brought so much harm to to what's happening in the film industry. And people always want to polarize choices and simplify choices, and of course for big production machines it's very easy to sort of make things calculable, and very often people want to standardize things, they want to standardize exhibition, the way it gets exhibited, standardize what you're shooting on. But in the end, I mean, I think everybody should shoot on whatever they want to shoot on, and I think we all together as a group should make sure that we keep all those choices on the table, and by saying that this is better or this is worse, you start polarizing, and you automatically ignore the fact that there's no better, there's no worse. But I mean, Roger feels very comfortable on the medium that he shoots on, and he makes the most beautiful stuff. And Bob, so do you, and Rachel and Janus, and then I cannot really.
We're fed up with this subject matter.
Well, let's move
Sorry,
on.
I brought it up.
So,
It's a
before
distraction,
we
I think.
started, you commented that you wanted your film to look like someone else shot it.
Correct, yeah. I mean, often
Explain that for
in
me.
the past, I would visit Roger on the set, and I would see his beautiful lighting, and Roger would say, "How's that backlight, Janusz? How is that backlight?" So, no, Roger, on this movie, no backlight. So, I think, the idea of deglamorizing the images, I've been always interested in that. I didn't want that classical Hollywood light. I've altered my lighting style. For the first time, I was lighting with tap light, which usually I don't do that because I find it very challenging and always scary when you get tap light. But this story permitted for me to do that, where I don't mind if there are a little bit shadows under the eyes. Not on the girl, but on the guys. On the girl, you don't put shadows. But on the guys, you can do shadows. And different color palette, not many colorful lights. A little bit more naturalistic looking. And then occasionally I would do the traditional stuff with backlight and stuff. But I was trying to restrain myself because the story was 100% allowed me to do that, And then, of course, there was this one great movie called All the President's Men. And this picture happens right before All the President's Men, which is a story of Pentagon Papers being published by Washington Post, where All the President's Men are about Watergate. In fact, we are finishing our movie implying that maybe we are the picture that happened right before All the President's Men. There's a little homage we do at the end. And I think, to me, the biggest objective was to create images that feel relevant to what's happening right now to us as a nation and what's happening to the press, what's happening with this administration being really, really critical of press and freedom of speech and critical of the constitutional rights of all the citizens. So I wanted to make a movie that feels contemporary, although it's 1971, but needed to feel contemporary. To the point where in the picture, there is an original recording of Nixon who says, Neil Shannon, this cocksucker, he needs to be fired, And fired is the phrase that this fellow adapted from Nixon. Of course, in 1971, I was not here. When I was in Poland, living in Poland, the Vietnamese were the good guys. So this is completely another aspect of demystifying Americans' honesty, because as I was growing up in Poland, this was the beacon of democracy. This was the beacon of truth. The movies that were made in the 70s were the movies that I wanted to come to America for. So I think whether this was a conscious decision or not, what's happening right now in this administration and what's happening in our movie has direct relations. So I wanted to make something that feels relevant, that feels like, it was made now for the audience of these days. Yeah.
What did you and Stephen talk about? I mean, I'm sure you have these very
We
conversations.
actually do not have conversations, to be honest with you. He does his thing, I do my thing, and that's the best thing I like to talk. Because often when you talk with directors, and I've got very limited experience with other directors, you talk, you're sitting at a table, all this theory, and then all falls apart, and you just wasted 2 weeks talking about something that you never do. So with Stephen, he does his thing, I do my thing, and somehow we both see this movie the same way, and we enjoy making a movie. His main concern is that people look presentable and dignifying, and that's I've got the same concern. I want I want people to look dignifying. So as I said earlier, the lady would get a little bit more light and Tam will not necessarily get the same light. So you know, not to create Meryl to look like a movie star, but she's essentially the star. She's Katharine Graham. She's the owner of the Washington Post. So you want her to have a presence that is different than all the other actors.
To go back to what you were saying before, did you go to him and say, for this movie, I don't want it to look like I shot it?
No, because certain things you don't reveal. You don't, even after 27, 25 years, you don't want to give too much information because then you subject yourself to being questioned. And sometimes I don't really have an answer. It just feels right. You know, why is that light up there? What's up there? Why is it bouncing? I don't know. It feels right for the story. Okay, good. So, and I remember during Schindler's List, we did one scene at the table where the Jewish family is swallowing diamonds, you know, and there's one top light. And I went to him, look, man, this is dark. I don't know what's going to come out. And he says, well, it looks really great. You feel liberated. You don't have fear. So same with this movie. We all want to take chances because it's not this comfortable life we've chosen where we just make movies and we work with movie stars. We express ourselves artistically through our work. And you want to take chances. So when you work with collaborators who are willing to do this and encourage you to take the chances, then it's the ideal thing. That you don't mind, you know, having 2 divorces and you know, because they're making movies is so liberating to some degree. So we didn't talk much about what we're going to do.
Rachel, there are still a limited number of women shooting Hollywood movies today. What has your experience been as a woman in this business?
I mean, my hope is that it's changing and changing fast, and it seems to be. I mean, I feel like there's a real sort of palpable momentum, you know, out in the universe. Not so much politically right now, but I think at least in the Hollywood universe where there's a real push to get more women both in front of, you know, directing and better roles for women and certainly for cinematographers. There's still very few of us, you know. I think it's sort of mind-blowing that there's, you know, 51% women and 4% female DPs, probably 0.05% female gaffers, female key grips. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, quite frankly. I mean, this is, you know, our world is dealing in emotion, which is something that I think women are known for doing quite well. And, you know, it's really about channeling empathy into visual imagery. So I think it's changing. I hope it's changing. Look, I'll never know what happens behind closed doors, you know, or why I don't get hired for something, but I've never had an experience that made me feel any less than. I think the big trick is just to get to a point where we're just considered DPs and we're not female DPs. And, you know, when you think of the word doctor or teacher, you don't think gender, and it'd be nice to get to a place where DP meant either, you know,
Sure.
and director meant either, and gaffer meant either.
For the rest of you, are you seeing more women on crews, and or do you make an effort to hire women on your crews?
I always try to get some women in the camera department, always, and in the lighting, but it's more difficult in the lighting department and grips, but in the camera department, because it's just changed the whole feeling in the trucks, and the set is just getting much more relaxed. So for me, it's a very big deal to try to get some women in the departments there.
Bob, you were nodding too.
No, it's a big change, I think, in the last 10 years. And I think I have 3 women electricians right now working on the show I'm on. And there's at least 3, 2 of the loaders and 1 of the assistants are women. And it isn't just the traditional roles. You know, it used to be the script person, all the pretties, you know, hair, makeup, work. It's all different now. And assistant directors now, it's a completely different and in a wonderful way because it really is it was always a family, but now it feels more of a community. And I really like that.
I totally agree. In the camera department, we have a little bit over 50% now women. Feels good, you know.
Now, we didn't talk too much about production on Dunkirk yet, so just to go back to that a bit. Now, you shot on land, in the air, in the water, with you know, the IMAX and the 65 millimeter cameras, and you also did quite a bit handheld, I know. What were some of the big production challenges that you faced in this film?
It was for us very important to sort of make it feel like you're there, like almost like it's shot on a GoPro, but we still wanted to take all the advantage of the big format of IMAX. So we did a lot of engineering because there are just no off-the-shelf solutions for anything you want to do. So we did a lot of tinkering, you know, and I always loved that, coming up with mounts and rigs and, you know, engineer stuff to put cameras at places where you normally wouldn't see them. You know, if you know the limitations of the cockpit, you know that you can only arm the camera in from a certain direction. So Dan Sasaki, he built us snorkel lenses for the big format that had knees and knuckles in them. So we could literally operate it by just twisting the lenses, or we could have the camera, straight up, and we would poke out like a little alien. Those kind of things we were building. But then also we built splashbacks for the cameras that open in certain ways so we could easily reload, because an IMAX camera has only 2 minutes of film on it. So all those kind of things can get extremely time consuming if you don't come up with the right solutions. Well, you've been shooting on the beach in a war situation, so you're probably very aware of the difficulties there and the salt water.
Didn't you also work with Panavision on some development?
Yeah, we work with Panavision, we work with Ariflex. We used to work with Movicam, I mean, it's not really the equipment, as we all agree. It's like the wardrobe designer. What kind of sewing machine you're using? So essentially, it's a sewing machine. Pulls 9. That's that. So, but how we interpret the material and what we put out, that's what's essential. The cameras, the lenses are, it's what's happening right there and the choices that we make, not rather there.
Okay. So I'm going to switch topics a little bit. I'd like each of you to name a director, living or dead, that you never worked with, but you would like to have worked with, and why?
Andrei Tarkovsky.
Okay. And why?
He was a great director. I just love his films.
Okay. There's too many for me. Tarkovsky's one, Kurosawa, Sofia Coppola, Wong Kar-wai, Mir Kusturica. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation, but there are so many.
Well, let's pick one. Sophia, what about her work?
I mean, I think Sofia has a really incredible sense of visual language in conjunction with, really different storytelling. I feel like every film she makes is quite different, but beautiful in its own way. I think there's a respect for the cinematography there, which is always a nice place to enter the conversation.
Bernardo Bertolucci. Really classic movie maker. He made one of the biggest and best movies on the planet, I think, and now to tell the stories with the cameras and not be afraid of that.
Done Truffaut, I think.
Oh, yeah.
I love that. That would have been, or Melville, either of those guys. Melville. That era of French film, I just love.
Clouseau.
I would go David Lean.
It's difficult though, because you get very often, even your agent would ask who you really want to work with, and the people that you very often love or that make the most beautiful films, you kind of feel unneeded or unwanted. It's like, what can you add to that thing? So maybe you should choose to work with the people that you don't sort of respect to death, but just think are good filmmakers, and together you can maybe do something more interesting.
So it says the DP who just started working with Nolan and has brought so much to the table.
Well, thanks. But I mean, it's very hard to say no, of course, to when somebody like Chris asks you. But no, but I just recognize, because it's always so difficult to answer that question, because what your role is as a DP is I mean, it's so personal sometimes, and you have to at least feel when you start working with somebody that there's a little space for you where you can sort of do your thing, or there's a little space where you think, oh, I can improve his work a little bit, or I can steer his work or her work a little bit in a different direction.
Was there an image or a sequence in a recent movie that just really knocked you out, inspired you? And if so, which one?
I went to see a film yesterday, Lucky, with Harry Dean Stanton. And it's kind of a nice film, but it inspired me to rewatch Paris, Texas, which I did last night. And I think the last scene of Paris, Texas is one of the most haunting scenes in movie making, really. I only mention it just because I happened to watch it last night. I was just drawn to it because of Harry Dean Stanton.
I'm with you.
Just the pacing and the performance and the emotion within the scene is just so beautiful.
But as you're talking about the pace, I think that's the biggest challenge, right now. The old days, the pace was much slowly, and you can really tell with the camera and tell the story. Right now, it's just getting so fast, everything. Yeah. So, going back to this, 50s pace is just amazing, and it's...
Mentioning Melville, there's a scene in Army of Shadows, right, where they take this, resistance member who's given information to the Nazis, this young kid, and they stick him in the kitchen and they put him on a chair. And there's this long scene where they're talking about how they're going to kill him. And it's like an empty, abandoned house. It's their safe house. But this guy's sitting on the chair with his hands behind the back. And these two characters are just discussing in front of him how they're going to kill him. And it goes, doesn't it? It's they play it. Melville plays it so long, it becomes so kind of, And if you just cut that like a lot of people would today, it
into little
would be
pieces.
nothing. You know, it would be nothing.
Absolutely.
But it's just so, you just can't get out of the scene. He keeps you there and makes you watch this thing, and it's brilliant filmmaking.
Great,
So that's when, when a filmmaker transcends what's on the page. The idea of the scene, he transcends it by the pacing and the cuts and the spaces between the dialogue, and that's when it becomes really exciting, I think.
That's by the way,
why I've loved working with Denis. For me, he's doing that,
Right.
That's actually a very nice thing that we today as filmmakers have, that, is a much bigger arsenal of reference materials. I mean, we can start prepping a movie and we can go to screening room and watch, Wages of Fear or the Battle of Algiers on the screen and learn and see what they did and copy it or get inspired by it. And that's kind of interesting. There's so many great experiments done through the history of cinema that we can sort of just use and abuse, and I think that feels quite nice,
I agree with you in part, but on the other hand, I've met a lot of people who don't even know who Jean-Pierre Melville is.
Yeah. I've worked with people who haven't seen a film before 1985 and don't know film culture. And I've done little talks like we all have at film school where people have never seen a Sidney Lumet movie. And it's just astonishing. It is amazing to me. We have it, and we're aware of it. And it is a wonderful thing to draw on. I don't know, does anyone start a movie without sitting in a screening room with the director at some point in prep and looking at things that it's just fantastic. But
Or photographers, still photographers.
Still photographers are really good.
How many people know the great stills photographers? You mentioned Salgado or Alex Webb or something, and people go, who's that?
So is there a solution? I mean, what can be done to inspire this sort of education that's missing?
Nothing.
I really don't.
You need an intellectual...
Do many of you go out and do talks at film schools?
But I'm always, I'll screen something, and everyone, it's like the first time they've ever seen it, a film made in 1980, or a film made in 1975, and it's like, what's that? Nobody's seen... Owen, the guys who reinvented movies for me were all the New York cinematographers in the 1960s and the French in the New Wave. And Owen Roizman, Gordon Willis, all the way back to Kaufman. It's just not part of film school. And I think when I went to film school, I was really aware of films were made in the 30s and 40s. And they seemed to inform everything I was thinking about and everything I was doing. And it doesn't feel like film students today. That's as far away when I was in school as the films of the 70s and 60s are now. And yet it doesn't seem like that's part of anybody's interests, or at least for most of the students I've met or talked to at AFI, USC, UCLA. I don't know what the solution is.
I think it's so much about, what's just gone, the flavor of the day. I remember being at film school and there was a documentary director there, directed Song of Ceylon, which is Basil Dearden. A very famous early documentary. It was quite radical. And he was doing for us this sort of film history course. So we were expected to watching these rather kind of long documentaries or sort of studies on something. So we go, and the first film he showed was Sergio Leone Western. And I thought that was fantastic because his whole love of films went that whole stretch, that whole distance between this different kind of filmmaking, and then we would see, Battle of Algiers or, whatever. But it was just fantastic, the whole breadth of filmmaking. But I think it's got so narrowed now.
It really has, I think.
There's maybe an oversaturation of media available, and so people are, binge watching television shows and all of these things, and perhaps it's as simple as inspiring someone to, spend a year watching movies again instead of the 7 seasons of this, that, or the other thing.
Maybe, yeah.
Virtual reality has been a big topic these days. Have any of you tried it, and what are your thoughts on its potential?
I'm doing a film right now, and there are some scenes that are set on the surface of Mars. Now, we met some people from JPL, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory.
Martians, we met some Martians.
We actually met with some people from Mars. But they have that rover there now that actually is shooting images, 360, and it's just shooting images and images and images. So they have, stitched all the images together, and with a virtual reality goggles, you can actually walk on the surface of Mars, which was incredible. It's a very strange mood there, very strange atmosphere on Mars. The light, it's weirdly soft, and the color, the quality of the light, and it was very very exciting, actually, very inspiring to use it for something like that. The other experience I have with virtual reality is going with my daughter to an IMAX place here, where you go on rides with goggles, and she loves it. She's hysterical. I had it on my head for like 3 minutes, and I wanted to vomit. It was like it's a different generation. I don't know.
Anyone else? Hopefully not that particular experience.
I tried it as well when we shot John Wick 2. That did it. But I have exactly the same. After 2 minutes, I have to throw up. It's just
like quietly shuffling over the surface of Mars is fine, but it's just being thrown down a colorful tunnel with cartoon figures is too much.
Okay, so a few more last questions I wanted to touch on. We'll start with you, Janus. Sure. Happiest accident while shooting?
Getting image out of focus, being in the movie, that's a happy accident. And being told, wow, that's a very good image. It was really an accident, and it just became out of focus. But then you use that out of focus and employ towards telling the story, In AI, when we introduce a little kid in the elevator, when the elevator door opens, I was looking through a long lens and was out of focus, and the door opened and he started coming in and said, oh my God, that's a great image, And Steven said, this is great, just do the whole, let him come all the way out of focus, and to the sharpness, which is not a new technique, but we stay on that image long enough to really appreciate the strength of that image.
Mm-hmm. When we shot Solomon Kane, we have a lot of rain there as well, and we have the same problem with fog on the rain deflectors, and the director kept that in the movie. So it looks amazing, the fog is very, very strong in the beginning, and the rotating is going on, it's just disappearing, and it's opening up the landscape. It looks fantastic, but it was just a big mistake when we did it. But it looks really cool now.
Hoyte?
The last film, we kind of worked a lot of momentum, so it was all about happy accidents all the time. We were just keep shooting, try not to be precious about continuity too much, try not to be too precious about the weather. And then every day you have a moment you get lucky, where it's pure dumb luck that stuff starts looking interesting. But we had some real accidents on the set. We had one camera mounted on the wing of a mock-up Spitfire that we were going to catapult out in the sea. And the divers, they were all going to be there, and we were going to retrieve that camera, and we had a whole plan. So the plane got catapulted, and the divers were swimming to the plane, but the plane literally sank to the bottom, like in a matter of a few seconds. So then it went to the sea bottom, and the film couldn't be retrieved for several hours, like 2 hours or something. And once we retrieved the film, the camera was broken, everything was soaked. It was literally just laying on the sea bottom. But our focus puller, Bob Hall, and our loader, they came up with a plan, and they took the magazine to the dark room, and they poured fresh water over it, and they sealed it and sent it back to America in a container, immersed in water, and it's a shot that actually made it to the film. So look great. I'm kind of almost thinking I should treat all my all my images with salt seawater at some point.
Paul Thomas Anderson, I work with a lot, loves accidents. He loves things to go wrong. He loves, if the set fell over, he'd be thrilled. He wants things to he wants something to go wrong. And on There Will Be Blood, we were burning an oil well derrick out of wood, and it was supposed to burn a little bit and put it out and do it. And it caught on fire and couldn't be put out. So we had to shoot the entire sequence kind of really fast in sort of a crazy way. And it ended up working out really well because of the chaos of that moment, even though we were all safe, but it meant that we had to run all over the place and in preconceived ways. And I think it actually made the scene work in a much more interesting way. And that's sort of what Paul's all about, too. So
it's such a beautiful scene, really beautiful scene.
Roger, Rachel?
It's usually just weather, things that you get lucky with. I don't really know anything specifically.
Okay, and Rachel?
I think that was the one thing with celluloid is there would be no shortage of happy accidents, whether it was, a mag getting slightly flash that turned out to be for the better, or a flare that you didn't see the extent of it until it got developed. So I think there were sort of, on little accidents or Fruitvale, I feel like there were a number of those. And in Fruitville, we actually had a similar thing as Bob with we were only allowed to shoot between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. in the BART platform. So it was just, we had football plays and we were running, gunning it, and it was, not how we would have done it in a perfect world, but I think it actually served the story quite well.
Well, we're out of time, so I want to thank everyone for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right.
And thank you for watching.
Ready?
Okay, quiet on set.
And I look down the lens.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Hi, I'm Margot Robbie.
Bryan Cranston. Robert Pattinson.
John Boyega.
I'm Sam Rockwell.
Willem Dafoe.
Emma Stone.
Allison Janney.
Guillermo del Toro. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching.
Thanks for watching The Hollywood Reporter.
The Hollywood Reporter. The Hollywood Reporter.
On YouTube.
On YouTube.